Hello and welcome to the Waz Chronicle, and in this chronicle we should be looking at Gustav Stresemann. So the question is simple: who was Gustav Stresemann? What did he actually do, and why was he so important? This individual actually single-handedly managed to stop Hitler from getting to power, and it sounds strange, but I'll be explaining in more detail as the chronicle goes on. Just before we begin the chronicle, I wanted to bring your attention to this quote. And it says, everything we hear is an opinion, not a fact. Everything we see is a perspective, not the truth. It's said by Marcus Aurelius, but the thing is, it actually rings true. See, we live in an age of social media where everything we hear and we see, we think that's just objective fact. And that's why history is so important, because not everything you see is exactly what it is. So sometimes just a simple question helps. Keep that in mind. So our chronicle begins with the baby Gustav Stresemann. Look how cute he is. Now, before we carry on, if you want to leave a comment about how cute he is, just leave it in the comments below. Now, Stresemann's born on 10th of May 1878 and is born into a family which runs a small business. He decides to help out in that business and obviously carries on and develops that business. However, there's something I mentioned to you, and that is that baby is not Stresemann. It's actually baby Hitler. That's right, that baby, the little cute one, is actually Adolf Hitler. So, the question is, who was Gustav Stresemann? Let's start off with what we know about him so far. Stresemann grew up and decided that it's time I moved along, and he got his family business and he decided to study economics and politics. Why? So he can further his ambition of being a politician. Eventually he decides it's time to hit the road and go into politics, and this is where he decides to join a party. By 1907, Gustav Stresemann, pictured here, actually joins the Reichstag. He becomes the deputy of the National Liberal Party, and eventually by 1917 he becomes their chairman. Gustav Stresemann was a massive supporter of Kaiser Wilhelm. So when the war ended and Kaiser Wilhelm abdicated, Gustav Stresemann decided to set up his own party, the German People's Party. It was a right-wing party, but more centre-right, and it wanted to make sure that there was nationalistic values that were put forward in the Reichstag. See, the aims of the party were simple: to make Germany into an international power again, and also to reconcile with all its enemies, to make sure there's no more conflict. And as you've figured out, that isn't Gustav Stresemann. Obviously, that is Iron Man, aka Tony Stark, aka Robert Downey Jr. So the mystery still remains. Who was Gustav Stresemann? I'll give you a clue. Gustav Stresemann was bold. And don't get me wrong, I got nothing against bold people. There's some really famous bold people who are really cool. Can you think of any bold people? I'll give you one clue. You got Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. Dwayne Johnson was a famous wrestler and also a really famous actor. Then you have Professor Xavier from the X-Men, also Patrick Stewart who plays him. Both amazing, both characters and actors. Now you got Michael Jordan, the greatest basketballer of all time. He won 6 championships with the Chicago Bulls. And you got Iron Mike Tyson, who was one of the most feared boxers of all time. And finally, you've got the comedic genius that is Mr. Bean. Okay, Mr. Bean's not bold, but you get the idea. Some of the coolest people that you know are bold. Okay, on to the greatest bold person ever, Gustav Stresemann. See, Gustav Stresemann becomes Chancellor of Germany in 1923. He heads the Great Coalition. By doing this, he actually tries to resolve the problems in the Ruhr and the economic problems that follow. But there's a confession to make. This is not Gustav Stresemann. This is Pablo Picasso. Okay, now that's the last time I'll do that. This actually is Gustav Stresemann, and Gustav Stresemann is an absolute genius. See, Stresemann is super important because Stresemann manages to do something no one else can do. Okay, he doesn't become Chancellor for long. He's only Chancellor for 100 days, and in November 1923 he resigns. But he carries on becoming the Foreign Minister of Germany and the Weimar Republic for a long time, all the way until his death in 1929. See, Stresemann was a nationalist. He didn't like the Weimar Republic or the Treaty of Versailles, but he put his differences aside to make sure the Republic was stable. He even ushered in the golden years of the Weimar Republic between 1924 and 1929, and he single-handedly made sure that extremist parties such as the Nazis never got into power during his time. So you might be asking yourself, how is Gustav Stresemann a superhero? And the answer is quite simple. See, Gustav Stresemann came into Germany at a time where he was needed, just like any hero would. If you cued his superhero music, you'd see him flying in, trying to rescue Germany from all the turmoil that was there before. For example, in 1919 there was the Spartacist uprising, then in 1920 there was the Kapp Putsch, by 1923 there was the Ruhr crisis, and hyperinflation which decimated the economy, and then finally you had Hitler and his cronies trying to take over in the Munich Putsch of 1923. So what does Stresemann actually do? Why is he a superhero? Stresemann is a superhero because not only does he sort out the rural crisis, he also deals with hyperinflation by introducing the Rentenmark. I'll go into this in more depth in another chronicle, but just understand the basic overview of it. He also signs treaties such as the Locarno, the Kellogg-Briand Pact, and also joins the League of Nations. He also sorts out Germans' problems socially and politically. Germany is seen as fantastically happy during his tenure, up until his death. And that's something we'll go into next. But understand, Stresemann single-handedly pulls Germany from the abyss and returns them to prosperity. What's even more amazing is that Gustav Stresemann actually won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1926 for his work with France. Bringing together two countries that hate each other was thought impossible. By doing that, he's rewarded with the highest honour. Eventually, in October 3rd, 1929, Gustav Stresemann sadly dies of a stroke, and that pretty much brings Germany to chaos. It is only a couple of weeks later that Germany suffers as a result of the Wall Street crash, without their superhero there to save them. Just before his death, Stresemann warned of the extremists and the fact that the extremist parties would try to take power again. He also suggested the Treaty of Versailles and the problems people experienced would be fertile ground for extremists to breed on. And finally, he talked about the economic position being like a volcano, and the fact that Germany was dancing on this volcano which would eventually erupt. We all know it did in the Wall Street crash of 1929. So how should Stresemann be remembered, and what was his actual impact? His impact was humongous. Stresemann pretty much saved Germany from complete destruction, and he actually stopped people like Hitler getting to power for at least 10 years. So Stresemann is super important. Some people even argue he's the greatest politician of all time in Germany by single-handedly stopping a crisis and making Germany come back from the brink of destruction. Obviously, I'll talk more about him in more detail in the next chronicle, and especially about what he did during his tenure. And that's the end of this particular chronicle. Obviously, thank you for listening and making your way all the way to the end. If you do get a moment, please do leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and please do subscribe. It does help the channel grow, and I really do appreciate it. Obviously, if you're wondering if this is the end of Stresemann, the answer is no. I will be making another chronicle discussing his actual impacts on Germany individually. Thank you for your time once again, and have a lovely day. Bye.